Hi friends, my name is Becca and welcome to my channel. If this is your first time here, welcome. And if you've been with us before, welcome back. We focus on all things middle grade literature here on this channel. And we specifically focus in on the first chapters of your favorite middle grade novels. Now, today we have a fan favorite, Alan Gratz. We all love him. We all know him. We all love him. He has so many phenomenal novels. And we are going to be reading a little altered version of a first chapter of his novel 2 Degrees, A Planet in Crisis and Time is Running Out. And as you see, there is a pretty big fire here on the cover. So this book really dives into the topic of global warming, which is such an important topic for us to know and understand and read about. Now, this book is broken up into a little bit of a different format. So like I said, we're not exactly going to be reading the first chapter, but I'll make sure that you have a good idea of what this novel sounds like. So basically how this novel works is it's broken up into multiple parts, and then each part is broken up into 3 different locations. So we have the Sierra Nevada, California storyline, the Churchill, Manitoba storyline, and the Miami, Florida storyline. So I'm going to read you the first section of each location within part 1. I'll explain more as I go, but let's start by reading the synopsis on the front and side cover to get more of an idea what this novel is going to be about. Fire, ice, flood. 3 climate disasters, 4 kids fighting for their lives. Akira is riding her horse in the California woods when a wildfire sparks and grows scarily fast. How can she make it to safety when there are flames everywhere? Owen and his best friend George are used to seeing polar bears on the snowy Canadian tundra, but when one bear gets way too close for comfort, do the boys have any chance of surviving? Natalie hunkers down at home as a massive hurricane barrels toward Miami. When the floodwaters crash into her house, Natalie is dragged out into the storm with nowhere to hide. Akira, Owen, George, and Natalie are all swept up in the devastating effects of climate change, but they are also connected in ways that will shock them and could alter their destinies. All right, so basically we're going to read the very little first section about Akira, the very first section about Owen, and the first section about Natalie. But we're going to have to skip around a little bit to do that, if that makes sense. All right, so we start off with the Sierra Nevada, California, which is in part 1. And I'm going to read you the very first chapter of this part. Red flag warning. Dad, look, a wildfire, Akira Christensen cried. She pointed down the mountain trail where a thin gray wisp of smoke rose from the trees in the valley. Akira's father rode just ahead of her on a black Frisian horse named Elwood. Akira was riding Dodger, her chestnut gelding quarter horse. Dodger had been the first one to sense the fire below, stopping and turning his ears towards the smoke to let Akira know there was trouble. Akira's father pulled to a stop and glanced over his shoulder. A first-generation Norwegian-American, Lars Christensen looked like a real-life Paul Bunyan, complete with blue jeans, a red plaid shirt, and a bushy brown beard. Don't worry about it, he told Akira. I'm sure it's nothing. Akira frowned. She checked the fire conditions before setting out on their ride that morning. The National Weather Service had issued a red flag warning for the Sierra Nevada range today, as they did almost every other day in the fall. A red flag warning meant warm temperatures, dry conditions, and strong winds, which all added up to the possibility of a forest fire. How could smoke in the foothills not be a problem? Akira looked at the ground where brittle leaves and pine needles were ready and waiting to burn. Shouldn't we at least let Cal Fire know? She asked. A little fire is good for a forest, her dad told her. It gets rid of all the dry stuff before too much of it builds up and burns out of control. Yeah, but it seems like there aren't any little fires anymore, Akira thought. Not since the temperature of Earth had risen nearly 2 degrees. And the hotter air and longer droughts had sucked the moisture out of everything, making California a tinderbox. Now, almost every fire was a megafire that burned up half the state. And it was all thanks to human caused climate change. Akira had learned about it in school last year, and it had scared her. But when she'd come home and told her family what she'd learned, her dad said the same thing then and he said now. Nature can take care of itself. He clicked his tongue for Elwood to walk on, clearly done with the subject. Akira shook her head. Her dad had seen all the same changes in the Sierra Nevada that she had in the past few years. Bigger, more frequent, more destructive wildfires, smoke warnings that caused her to stay home and miss school, drought conditions that made their well run dry. But she knew better than to say the words climate change around her dad. All he would do is challenge her on it, and Akira didn't have the energy for that. Her father got energy from engaging with other people. It recharged him to be social. Akira was the opposite. She liked people, but being on all the time drained her. After a week of the normal chaos of school and family, she needed these peaceful, restorative Saturday morning rides with Dodger. And arguing about climate change was definitely not peaceful. Akira looked over her shoulder at the smoke and sighed. Then she gave Dodger a pat on his withers to let him know she had gotten his message. Thanks, Dodger. Everything's okay, she told him. I hope, she added silently. Okay, there then goes on to be a few more chapters about Akira in the Sierra Nevada, California, but we are going to jump ahead to page 25 and read the first chapter of Churchill, Manitoba, Part 1, and read about our next two characters. And the first chapter of this section is called The Tundra Buggy. A big male polar bear stood up on his hind legs and put his front paws on the tundra buggy with a thump, and the tourists sitting inside jumped back and gasped. Standing behind them in the aisle, 13-year-old Owen Mackenzie smiled and rubbed his hands together. He was definitely going to get good tips on this trip. They don't call Churchill the polar bear capital of the world for nothing, folks, Owen said. The tourists shook off their surprise and leaned in to ooh and ah and take pictures of the polar bear. And Owen's dad turned around in the driver's seat and gave Owen a quiet fist bump. Owen's parents were the owners and operators of Tundra Treks, a company that took people to see polar bears in the frozen wilderness outside Churchill, Manitoba. Churchill was a tiny town in northeast Canada, 1,000 kilometers south of the Arctic Circle on the western side of the Hudson Bay. Polar bears mostly ate seals, but could only catch them on ice that was formed when the ocean froze over in the winter. When spring came and the sea ice melted, the polar bears came back on land and spent the whole summer going hungry. Then every October, 1,000 polar bears made their way to the place where the sea ice reformed first, Churchill, Manitoba. As soon as the bay froze over, the bears headed out to hunt seals again and begin their annual migration north. But for one glorious month, lots of chilling polar bears meant lots of tourists, which meant lots of money for families like Owen's. The polar bear outside the tundra buggy stretched his nose up to sniff one of the windows, and the tourists laughed with delight. Most male polar bears are about 2.5 meters long and weigh around 450 kilos, Owen said, reciting facts that he had memorized from his script. That's 9 feet tall and 1,000 pounds for you folks from the U.S. Owen had learned to explain things in ways that people from lots of different places could understand. Every year, 10,000 tourists visited Churchill from all over the world. Just today, he heard American English, British English, German, Spanish, and Korean. Owen had been working as a tour guide for his parents since he was 10. He was white with blonde hair like his dad's and blue eyes like his mom. He'd always been comfortable around adults, and he loved any chance he could get to grab a microphone and be the center of attention, which made him a natural as a tour guide on his family's tundra buggy. Tundra buggies look like huge white buses on black monster truck tires. The big tires help protect the fragile permafrost below and kept the tourists up high out of reach of the curious polar bears. Benches inside the tundra buggy could hold up to 40 people, but this late in the season, there were only about 20 people on Owen's tour. "Can we pet the polar bears?" one of the passengers asked. He was a boy around Owen's age, with light brown skin, black hair, and arching eyebrows that made him look continuously skeptical. "No," Owen said, answering for everyone. "Polar bears are the largest land predators on Earth. Even though they look like big, cute dogs to them, you look like a big hot dog with mustard and relish." The tourists laughed again. Owen loved a responsive group like this one. "Thankfully, polar bears prefer to eat seals," he went on, "but they've been known to attack humans, and they're sneaky about it. Everybody in Churchill leaves their houses and cars unlocked this time of year, just in case we meet a polar bear while we're out and have to duck inside someplace to get away." "Does that happen often?" a lady with a German accent asked, her eyes big at the thought. "Have you ever encountered a polar bear in town?" "Not me personally," Owen told her, "but bears come into Churchill all the time. A few years ago, a girl from my school was attacked on Halloween night." The crowd gasped. "It's okay, she survived," Owen said quickly. "Another time, a man in town came out of the shower and was drying off when he looked up and saw a polar bear peeking through his window," he said, and everyone laughed again. "Sometimes polar bears bust right into houses looking for food," Owen added. "Back when I was a kid," Owen's dad added from the driver's seat, "the Department of Natural Resources shot any bears that came into town. Now we tranquilize them and send them to polar bear jail, where they stay until the sea ice forms and they're airlifted out by helicopter and released into the wild." The scientific name for polar bears is Ursus maritimus, which means sea bear, Owen said, shifting back to his tour guide script. "That's because polar bears are such great swimmers." "Wait, can we swim with the polar bears?" the dark-haired kid from before interrupted. Owen took a deep breath. "No," he said. "Again, the polar bears would eat you. Besides, the water around here is freezing this time of year. You'd probably die of hypothermia first." The annoying kid shrugged. "If I was trying to get away from a polar bear, I would just dig a hole in the snow and hide where the bear couldn't see me," he said. "That is also a bad idea," said Owen. He turned to the rest of the group. "Maybe you've heard of the old saying about bears. If it's brown, lie down. If it's black, fight back. If it's white, say goodnight." "Because you're going to go to sleep with the bears?" the annoying kid asked. "No," Owen said, trying to keep his cool. "Because you're going to be dead. Polar bears are big, fast, strong, and smart, and you can't hide from them. Polar bears can smell seals miles away through 2 feet of ice. If you do have the misfortune of coming face to face with a polar bear, don't run and don't play dead, and never ever turn your back on a polar bear. Just back away slowly, making as much noise as you can, and maybe you'll survive." The bear outside moved away from the tundra buggy, and Owen's dad started the engine again. "Looks like it's time to head back in," Owen said, and everyone groaned. "We were hoping to see a mother and her cubs," a Canadian woman said as they rolled back into town. Owen smiled. Cubs were always a major attraction, but it was the end of the season, and most of the bears were out on the ice already. "Sorry, cubs are super cute. We do see them sometimes, but mama bears are very protective of their cubs. You do not want to come between a cub and its mother. Mama bear will wreck you," Owen said, getting a laugh. "What about climate change?" a man with a Scandinavian accent asked. "I read that the warmer temperature means there's less ice for the polar bears to live on." That's true, Owen told everyone. The sea ice is melting earlier and coming later every year. But hey, that means we get more time with the polar bears, he added brightly. The tundra buggy pulled into its big parking lot on the outskirts of Churchill. Owen went down the first steps and stood by the exit as the tourists came out. He thanked each of them for coming and graciously accepted their compliments and tips. When everyone was gone, the kid who'd asked all the annoying questions came down the steps and stood near Owen, staring at him quietly. Owen squinted at him, waiting long moments for him to do or say something. They both broke down in laughter at the same time. Dude, seriously? Owen cried. Can we pet the polar bears? Can we swim with the polar bears? George Gruyere was laughing so hard he had to hold his stomach. George had been Owen's best friend since they shared crayons with each other on the first day of kindergarten. They had been pretending not to know each other on the tour for laughs. George was Mushkegowuk. I'm probably mispronouncing that, so my apologies. The Mushkegowuk were an indigenous people, sometimes referred to as the Swampy Cree, and now registered with the Canadian government as the York Factory First Nation. George's ancestors had lived in this part of the world for millennia and had been the ones to greet the first French trappers who ventured north from Montreal in the 1600s. Owen's father came out of the tundra buggy and chuckled. George, I almost lost it when you said you'd dig a hole to hide from a polar bear, he said. He put a hand on Owen's head. Good job today, kiddo. You guys going out to the cabin now that you have the weekend off? Owen nodded. Ordinarily, this was the weekend the weather lady flew in from the States for her annual Arctic tour, renting out the whole tundra buggy for herself and her crew. She did wild stunts like crawling inside polar bear dens and lighting ponds on fire, which was always exciting. But her flight had been canceled because of bad weather or something. Owen was bummed, but glad to have the whole weekend to spend at George's family's ice fishing cabin instead. I just got to get my bag from Mom, Owen said, darting off across the parking lot. Owen's dad grabbed him by the shoulder and hauled him back, saving Owen from being run over by one of the tourists' rental cars that was driving away. Owen, his dad scolded him. I know there aren't tons of cars in Churchill, but you still have to pay attention. Right, Owen called, breaking away. Sorry. Owen banged inside the office of Tundra Treks, and his mom looked up at him with a smile from behind the counter. The tourists were raving about you, she told him. They're going home to tell their friends about Tundra Treks. Sweet, Owen said, running for his bags. I packed you and George some brownies, Owen's mom said. Aw, yes, Owen said. Thanks, Mom. You have everything you need? Phone, flares, air horn, bear spray, cracker shells? Yeah, Owen said. His mom, always worried, but most of the polar bears were already out on sea ice, and he and George had been out to the cabin by themselves plenty of times before. He was ready to run, but his mother curled a finger at him, and he slunk over to her. Owen, remember, she said, tapping his forehead. You have to pay attention and think. I know. Dad already told me. I mean it, she said. You're really good at focusing on what you're interested in, but really bad at noticing when you're about to step into an ice hole. Heh, ice hole, Owen said. Owen's mom narrowed her eyes. That is exactly what I'm talking about, young man. Think big picture. Big ice hole? Owen, his mother warned. Okay, Owen said, pulling away. Big picture, I got it. Have fun, his mom called as he ran outside, and watch out for polar bears. All right, that's the end of Owen's chapter. We are now going to pop ahead to page 45, where we are going to hear the first part of the Miami, Florida storyline. First chapter is titled The Big One. And this is a pretty quick chapter, so we should be just about done for those of you who are still hanging in here with me. I know this is a long one. The Big One. Natalie Torres sat on the edge of her couch, her eyes glued to the television and her weather journal clutched tight in her hands. Hurricane Reuben has gone back and forth between Category 4 and Category 5, the highest, most powerful category we have, Maria Martinez said on TV, pointing to the huge swirling mass of white clouds projected behind her. Everybody in Miami knew Maria Martinez, the chief meteorologist for one of the local news channels. They may not have watched the weather forecast every night like Natalie did, but when there was a hurricane, everybody in South Florida turned to Maria for the latest. Natalie knew that Hurricane Reuben had already brushed Puerto Rico, where Natalie's mother had been born and Natalie's father still lived, and made a devastating landfall in the Dominican Republic. After that, it had picked up strength again and swept along the top of Cuba, and now it was deciding where to go next. Our current projection models show Reuben possibly hitting the Florida Keys and heading west into the Gulf of Mexico the way Katrina did in 2005 on its way to New Orleans, Maria Martinez said. Or it could round the Everglades and travel north up the west coast of Florida. And of course, there's still a strong possibility that it will make a right turn at the Bahamas and drive straight up 95, hitting Miami and Fort Lauderdale and West Palm Beach and everything in between. Natalie shuddered. That's what she and everybody in Miami feared the most. The big one. The giant mythical hurricane that would destroy the entire southeast coast of Florida. For 100 years, Maria Martinez was saying, hurricanes have hit all over South Florida except for Miami. Andrew, Wilma, Irma, they all came close and they did a great deal of damage. But the last hurricane to hit Miami directly was in 1926, when only 100,000 people lived here. The Great Miami Hurricane leveled the city, killing hundreds of people and leaving tens of thousands more homeless. She paused. There are now close to 3 million people in Miami-Dade County alone. Natalie swallowed. Back when she was in second grade, everybody had thought that Hurricane Irma was going to be the big one. It wasn't. Irma ended up barely missing Miami, but it had come close. Close enough to rip Natalie's roof off while she and her mother huddled in the bathroom. Ever since Irma, Natalie had become obsessed with weather. She started keeping a weather journal where she wrote down the daily high and low temperatures, the cloud formations, the wind speed, the amount of sunshine and rain. She asked for a barometer and some of these words, anemometer and a rain gauge for Christmas, and hung them outside her bedroom window. Every time she had to do a science project or write a paper in school, she did it on a different hurricane. If the weather was going to shape Natalie's life, she wanted to know everything about it. Is it the big one? Natalie's mother called, coming in the front door with groceries. They don't know yet, Natalie said, hopping up to take 2 of the bags. Natalie and her mother had the same brown skin and brown eyes, but Mama's black hair was straight and never frizzied in the Miami humidity the way Natalie's did. Natalie didn't know how her mom could wear jeans and a blouse in this heat either. The most Natalie could bear to wear were shorts and an old tank top. But Mama always looked put together, even when there was a hurricane coming. The store was pretty picked over, Mama told her. I got what I could. Natalie followed her mother to the kitchen and helped her put the food away. Everything she bought was canned or dry and didn't need to be cooked or refrigerated for when the power went out. She bought candles and matches too, and batteries for their flashlights. Natalie glanced back at the television where Maria Martinez was now showing a map of Miami. The city sat between the Atlantic Ocean to the east and the vast wetlands of the Everglades to the west, northwest, and south. When Reuben hit them, directly or not, water was going to come at them from every one of those directions. Plus, down from the clouds and up through the porous limestone underneath the city. Maria Martinez was predicting storm surges of over 10 feet. During Irma, Natalie's house had flooded up to her knees, and that was before the roof had come off. Natalie felt a surge of panic. We have to get everything ready, she cried. She grabbed her weather journal and showed her mom the list she'd made. We have to fill the bathtub with water so we can flush the toilet once the power goes out, board up the windows, take all the pictures off the walls so that they don't fall and break. Put all our valuable stuff up high, out of flood range, charge our phones. Mija, her mother said, putting a hand on Natalie's head to calm her down. I know you're overwhelmed, but we'll get through this together. Natalie took a deep breath and nodded, and they got to work. She and her mother were filling up water bottles in the kitchen sink so that they'd have clean water to drink when Natalie's phone dinged. It was a text from her friend Shannon. OMG, the roads are full of cars. Are you leaving town? Are you leaving town? Natalie texted back. No, Dad says we're safe in our building. It has a generator. He says if the power goes out, it will be like a camping trip. Natalie shook her head. Shannon went to school here in Hialeah, their city within a city in Miami. But Shannon lived in one of those new high-rise luxury apartments in near Doral and not in a single story house like Natalie and her mom. Natalie and Shannon had met in homeroom last year at the beginning of 6th grade and had immediately bonded over their shared love of boba tea, K-pop, and extreme weather shows. Shannon texted her a picture of an interstate that skirted Miami, taken from her window. The highway looked like a parking lot. Every lane was packed bumper to bumper with cars headed north out of the city. Look, Natalie said, showing the picture to her mom. Huh, said Mama. Must be nice to be able to get out of town. Natalie's mom worked as an administrative assistant at a doctor's office, and Natalie knew her salary wasn't that big. If they went to Tampa or Orlando and stayed at a hotel every time there was a storm, they'd be broke. When the water bottles were full, Natalie and her mother went outside to cover the windows with plywood. There was one small transom window above the front door that was too small and too high to reach, but it hadn't broken in any of the previous storms. It was hot and muggy, and Natalie was panting and sweating by the time they had finished hammering. The October sun was bright, and there wasn't a cloud in the sky. It certainly didn't look like a hurricane was coming, but something still felt off. Natalie glanced around and began to understand what was wrong. No cars drove by. No birds twittered on the power lines. There weren't even any airplanes taking off and landing at the airport just south of them. Everything was quiet and still, like Natalie and her mom were the only two people left in Hialeah. Natalie knew that wasn't true. Most of the people in her neighborhood couldn't afford to leave. They were holed up in their houses already, preparing to ride out the storm. Into the creepy silence came a loud, frantic woo, woo. I probably didn't make that sound right. And it took Natalie a moment to realize it wasn't an alarm or a siren. It was frogs croaking in the nearby canal. The sound I made didn't sound anything like frogs, so I apologize. Natalie's mom pointed. Half a dozen snails were oozing up the cinder block foundation of their house, getting as high as they could. In the house next door, Natalie heard their neighbor's little chihuahua growling and barking. The animals know, Natalie thought. Something was coming. Something big. All right, so those are the first chapter of the 3 storylines we're going to be following throughout this novel. That's a lot to take in. I feel like I had goosebumps for the majority of the time I was reading those. Pretty scary stuff our characters are going to have to deal with. So if you enjoyed this first chapter Friday Read Aloud, please consider liking and subscribing. And until next time, everyone, happy reading.